Hi everyone, I'm Jack Saunders and welcome to Mystery Jet Speakers Corner. So we're going to be covering a range of different topics across the various different panels that we're going to be doing. On this one, it's all about gender equality and mental health and how the two link together. And across all the panels, we're going to be covering more than one topic initially, but as the conversation flows, you will find out that they will inevitably or are inevitably linked together. So this is my lovely panel, and guys, if you could start off by introducing yourselves one by one.
So I'm 𝙂𝙚𝙣𝙙. I'm best known as Britain's first out Muslim drag queen, and I live my life as trans.
I'm David Tovey. I'm an artist, activist and campaigner. Yeah, that's me.
I'm 𝙂𝙬𝙣𝙪𝙖𝙡. I'm the CEO and founder of Bloody Good Period.
I'm Blaine Harrison. I sing and write songs in Mystery Jets.
Okay, so as with, I think, the rest of the panels, I think it's nice to start individually and link together and then kind of start the conversation flowing there. So should we start with gender equality and the current climate of that at the moment in society in the UK? And maybe you can kind of sum it up for people at home who maybe aren't too hot on the topic or have been across the topic at all, and how it looks at the moment.
Just to talk about gender equality, it's pretty big. I'll talk about it from through a period lens, through a lens of menstruation. So the reason that we exist is because drop-in centres and places for asylum seekers and refugees were simply not catering to women and people who menstruate. So what we do at Bloody Good Period is we make sure that people have products they need, but we also campaign to normalise periods, and we also provide menstrual education and reproductive health education. And the reason that we came about is because, as happens in the rest of wider society, the same thing happened in the microcosm of an asylum seeker drop-in centre, that the cis male is seen as the default. So a cis male is a man who, oh God, sorry, I hate doing technicality, is a man who's born into a body which fits his sexuality and sorry, I didn't expect to be doing, to be telling everyone what gender equality is. Thank you. And because we basically placed them as the default, that meant that anything that was additional to that was seen as extra and therefore not as important. That was why we have ended up providing period products. And I think that applies for the rest of society, essentially. Anything that isn't seen as the default human, which is the man, is seen as additional and therefore a bit of extra trouble.
Okay. Asifa, how about for you? What's your view on the current climate of gender equality?
It's real. You know, people like to think that there is no gap. There's no gap when it comes to equal pay, for example, or even, for example, obviously me being a trans woman and living in Britain as a trans woman, I think I have a certain privilege. I pass, especially even without hair on, actually, I pass. So there is a sense of, I live a certain privilege when it comes to being transgender, and many people may not know that I live my life as a trans woman. When it does come to gender equality in Britain, if we add in certain factors like ethnicity, for example, you know, women of colour, for example, face an immense amount of discrimination, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's acquiring a job, whether it's equal levels of pay, whether it's just being taken seriously as being a woman. It's the best way I can describe it is the struggle is real.
Okay, so that hopefully gives you an idea of the climate of gender equality in the UK at the moment. Mental health-wise, David, you might be able to enlighten us on things and how seriously mental health is being taken in Britain at the moment.
Wow, yeah, that's... I don't think it's been taken seriously enough from my own experience of suffering many years with mental health problems. And when we look at something as simple as an A&E service in this country, and we have amazing doctors and nurses, don't get me wrong, right? It's amazing what the NHS is doing and the A&E. But when somebody who's going through hidden mental health problems and trauma, PTSD, etc., and they go to A&Es, there's no help there. I've spent many an hour going into A&E departments with my mental health. Prime example, I took my own life, and I tried it many times. And I was in hospital at the A&E, and I'd done a crystal meth overdose, and they tried to take blood out of me. No blood would come out. It was jellified. And because of the way the mental health system works in an A&E department, I was told to go home, and said that somebody would call you within 3 days. I never got that call because I went home to find myself homeless. And this is a problem. When you're crying out for help, like when you've got something seriously going wrong with your mental health, your life, whatever it is, that the help isn't there. I was crying out for months and months and months, and being turned away. So then I end up then trying to do it again and again and again, 17 times before someone listened.
That's not good enough.
And so this is what's happening. There is lack of funding going into the mental health side of things, the social care sector. We all know what's wrong. We all know that the system is broken. It only works for a certain few. I guarantee if our Prime Minister had an upset with his mental health tomorrow, I guarantee he would be seen there and then. I guarantee if you got money, you'll be seen. But if you're living in poverty or you're living on a breadline, you might as well just, I don't want to say give up, but, that is probably one of the best options out there at the moment.
There aren't any options for you, as it seems anyway. Okay, so both gender equality and mental health, they have a certain amount of bleakness perhaps to them at the moment in Britain. And Blaine, in terms of linking those two together, where do they meet? At what point do they meet?
I think too often we separate the term of toxic masculinity from feminism or gender equality, and I think obviously there's an argument to say that they have different causes, but essentially they come from problems within our society and the way that society is structured. I think mental health is mental health. It doesn't matter on how, what gender you identify as. It's something that needs to be addressed, and I think particularly with the cuts that happened through austerity, mental health services in this country have been hit the hardest. Rates of homelessness in this country took a huge leap over the last 10 years, and yet again, I think it's the poorest parts of society that are often penalised for actually the economic crisis, and I think that's very true in the disabled community. And I know, David, you've had some experience with personal independence payments. So in other words, if you're disabled in this country, you are entitled to some living allowance. Under the Conservative government, there was a process of recategorisation where everyone was reassessed. And if you didn't fall within certain parameters, you could have your benefits taken away from you. And just the knock-on effects in terms of mental health of that are just huge. And that's not talked about enough. It's kind of slipped under the net, and it's real, and it needs to be seriously addressed, I think. Mental health has
is quite a broad topic. There are many different almost subcategories to mental health that can be covered. I'm keen to kind of keep it towards the gender equality side of things as well, but I think it's key to acknowledge that it's not just within gender equality, it's a huge spectrum of it as well. Asifa, for you, how perhaps the discrimination that maybe you faced, identifying as trans perhaps, how's that affected you mental health-wise?
My mental health always goes up and down, and it's interesting because when I came out as transgender and when I started my medical transition and started on hormones, I entered the phase where there was a possibility of me losing my livelihood. So I was performing and still am performing in drag for many, many years, long before I transitioned. And the idea of venues sort of turning me away because I didn't identify as a drag queen anymore, or whether my transition would affect my career, that sort of came into play. The other thing obviously I had to deal with is negotiating or coming out as transgender in an ethnic minority and in a faith community as well. I'm British Pakistani, I come from a conservative Muslim background. So obviously dealing with all those identities, and just like Dave and Lane, I'm also disabled. I'm severely sighted. And being visually impaired and dealing with all those identities at once has taken a toll on my mental health. And it's got to the point now, I'm 36 and my mental health is my priority. If I'm not feeling good, I don't think people around me feel good, or my world doesn't feel good. And, you know, we're talking about this panel and this link between gender equality and mental health. I actually know a statistic from the Mind charity that South Asian women living in Britain are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than their white British counterparts. And that's a statistic from the Mind charity. So when we talk about gender equality and mental health, we have to take on board, you know, other identities as well, like disability, like ethnicity, like being from communities of faith, because it's all intertwined. All of it, we are all intersectional. And I believe that mental health is linked to all our different identities. And in this case, obviously, it is linked with my gender identity, but also to all the others as well. So, yeah, I have to put my mental health and assess it on a daily basis.
Guys, forgive me if you feel like I'm being a bit hasty moving along, but I know we've only got half an hour. I'd like to cover quite a lot of different stuff. So, Gabby, I want to come to you next. How do you feel the Me Too movement and also Time's Up, how do you feel that has had an effect on gender equality in Britain? Has it had a positive effect in any way? Have you seen any change at all?
I mean, it's hard to say. I haven't seen any change, but what I do know is that what it has brought is a collective voice, in that, I mean, it is incredibly sad that it was necessary for a woman to be believed. She had to have at least 20 other women saying the same thing happened to me. I mean, even in that case, she's often not believed. But the idea that I think that it's not the hashtag Me Too was actually started 10 years ago, I think, by a black woman who wanted to make a space for other women who've been sexually harassed to be able to speak out. And then the fact that it's come back 10 years is brilliant. But I think that just tells us, like, why was she not listened to 10 years ago? So actually, I think if you look at the gap of what's actually happened during that time, it's incredibly bleak. Actually, I think it's gained a lot of media attention because it is famous people, famous women saying it, and that is not to negate the validity of their experience as well. But it is incredibly frustrating that one is still required to be a acceptable looking woman to be even considered for belief, basically. And I think it's really difficult. I think that really what we've seen because of the right-wing press is just an absolute upsurge in men worrying about themselves and how they can act now. And I feel, of course, I have to say at this point, not all men, but there's been quite a significant surge in that. And that to me is just another step backwards of we're still not putting the needs of women first, even when they are talking to us about their trauma and about the things that have happened to them. So yeah, I think that there's so much more to do than to be wearing a pin on your tuxedo.
Where do you start then? Have you maybe considered about what the right steps would be to take to really have an impact and make some change?
I think the steps are being taken. I think people are doing the work. I think there's been thousands of years of women doing the work. All I can say is that the people in power have to listen. I don't think it's up to the people who are suffering to be the ones saying, well, okay, here's our steps, we'll make it clear for you. There's got to be a complete change in the way that people in power are accepting the stories of people who are telling them what is happening to them. And this applies to everything. We can't be expected to make it, like I think Noga was saying before, we can't be expected to make it easy for the people in power to do it. They have to step up to it.
I think we'll find that is probably a very common running theme throughout each and every panel today, for sure. Another one of those, I think, is awareness as well, and awareness around every single topic that we cover over the next 3 panels is paramount. And awareness of mental health, I think, I think as far as maybe the average person maybe views it on maybe Twitter or online and stuff like that, you feel like it's something that people talk about a lot more now. Do you feel that's right, David? Do you think?
Oh, yes and no. I think it's quite easy to share a tweet, and it's quite easy to repost something.
It's faceless, isn't it?
Yeah.
So,
whether they're talking about it is another thing. I think as artists we have a responsibility to talk about it. I think it's something. I quite like the fact that art and culture is a human right. Right, so and it means that not only is it a human right for me to show art, but it's also for people to receive it. But within that human right, we have to have responsibility. So I, as an artist, I mainly work in mental health and addiction, etc. in my work, and I feel that I have this first-hand knowledge of that. So it gives me the right to talk about it. It gives me the right to be able to say, well, actually, this is wrong, this is what should be happening, this is why we're not talking about it, why is it being brushed under the carpet, etc., etc. But not everyone feels that way, There are a lot of people who shut me down a lot. There's a lot of people who stigmatise me. I've got huge amounts of trolls on Twitter because of the way I talk about mental health. So if we're talking about it, yeah, we need to do it in the right way, but we're not. And it's same with the Me Too. When people start to share their stories and their pain and their trauma, they're vilified for it, and that's wrong. We have a media and people out there who hide behind a screen who will literally do whatever they can to hurt you. I work in this field, and I work with people going through trauma every single day. And then you've got they're sharing their stories and they're coming to and talking about their mental health, and straight away, within seconds, people are shutting them down, saying really nasty things. Well, how do they think that somebody who's going through mental health problems then suddenly receives all this damage? What's it going to do? I tell you what it does. It leads 84 people every week, men, to go and kill themselves. It leads people to isolate themselves and shut themselves away from the world, which they should be part of. So yeah, we are talking about it, but we're talking about it in a completely wrong way. It's evil. Sorry.
We're also not given the next step. We're told to talk about it, and then what? We're not. There doesn't seem to be any sort of, government push for actual making services better. There comes to a point where, having had mental health issues myself, you talk about it, but then, there's only so much that a conversation can do. And I think that there's very much this sort of, the conversation around mental health at the moment is completely inadequate in that it seems to be solvable with a conversation. And actually we know that there are hundreds of factors that affect people's mental health, especially factors that people cannot control, but that are made to, things like race, things like poverty, that these people are made to feel even worse for just being in their bodies. And it's, you know, it's really an absolute joke, this kind of just idea of just talk about it. No, you know, you need therapy, you need medication, you need hospitals that actually let people stay, you know, when they need space.
And the prime example of this was what you're talking about with the PIP payments. You know, there are a huge amount of people who are suffering mental health problems and disabilities, and then suddenly the country's saying, oh yeah, we're going to do this for people with mental health and disabilities, but then they take away the only access that they have to actually have a better life. They take it away from them. You know, I had mine completely taken away from me because they said I had the wrong disability. How can you define what the wrong disability is? You either are disabled or you're not. You know, you can't say one or the other. And yes, I'm disabled, but because I look normal-ish, that was a joke, by the way, it's not all morbid, right? But because I look like normal, they say, well, you're not disabled in the right way. You know, they don't look at, I have brain damage on my left side, but they don't look at that.
Yeah.
You know, they're just like...
And the other thing I want to add about that whole process is you're reassessed, you're given a grant for a certain amount of years, then you're reassessed again. So it's this constant reassessment of being disabled.
Having to prove yourself.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
It's not right. Blaine, I feel like the common or the kind of linking factor of everyone on all of these panels is art today. How much of a role does art play in mental health and helping people through that journey, do you think?
I think in a way art can serve two purposes. One is to be informative. I think it can help provide a platform for some of these conversations, talking about something I talk about a lot is male vulnerability. We need to rebrand male vulnerability. Obviously an expression that is circulated quite a lot is it's okay to not be okay. But I think we need to go further than that, and we need to say that you know, there's no shame in admitting to our vulnerabilities as men. It's so important to express that through our music. And then I think also the arts can provide a sense of escapism. And what I mean by that is that the modern world that we live in there is so much noise, which is perpetuated by social media and these kind of this sort of validation and I suppose when you're looking on things like Instagram, you're seeing ideals of other people's lives, but ultimately you're seeing diets you're not on, you're seeing parties you're not at, you're seeing holidays you're not on. This is something that affects us all. And I think it's something that we all have a responsibility to be conscious about that in the way that as artists we speak to our audiences. But I think also art, like I was saying, it does provide a certain comfort. It's somewhere that you can go when the world is getting too much for you. And it's something that is good for our mental health because we channel our experiences into something positive, and hopefully that may help people down the line.
And so do you feel like it's a good thing to encourage people to maybe find an art or something to do as a way of channeling and getting through a mental health struggle that they may be in? David, is that something that you...
I totally agree, yeah. Art saved my life, you know, and I'm not just exaggerating on this, it literally saved my life. If I didn't have art to pick me up out of this very low part of my life, then I would have had nothing. You know, I always say I quite like this. Like, you know, it shouldn't matter whether you're drawing a stick man or whether you're painting a Rembrandt. You know, because it's completely relative, right? It does the same feeling. It gets you here in your heart, and it gets you here, and it means that you can escape into that, whether it's for 2 minutes or whether it's for 2 hours. You escape all the crap, what's going on in the world and in your life, and you get to concentrate. But you get to create something, and something new, which no one's ever seen before. You know, so I say everyone should have the opportunity to do it. Like I said, it's a human right. We all have that opportunity.
opportunity and a chance through education as well, and things like that. And that almost brings us a little bit back onto the gender equality thing through education. And I feel from what you guys have been saying, that's what needs to happen to kind of bring people up to speed with what's working, or what's happening behind the scenes in terms of gender equality and the kind of misdynamic that's going on at the moment. Would you agree? As in, education is the key to it?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. But I think that the information's there. You know, it's all there. I mean, I can't tell you how many dates I've been on where I've been asked to explain what feminism is. And literally, it's on Wikipedia.
Just Google it, yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I think it's, for a certain part of the population, the people who really do need to do that educating, it's not that education's not available, it's that they don't want to take it up. And that's, you know, that's a completely separate problem to, you know, information about gender equality not being made available in schools, for example, boys not knowing they can be vulnerable, girls not knowing they can be angry, people not knowing that one doesn't have to adhere to a certain gender at all. That's completely different, I think, to the actual change makers and the people that should know better and that could very easily, you know, pick up a copy of Bell Hooks, whatever, and actually just read it and understand. I think that there's got to be a certain amount of responsibility for education. We can talk about awareness, we can talk about getting it out there. It's there. You know, the reason we're all here is because we've done the work, we've made ourselves educated. I think it's accessible for people.
Asifa, anything to add from you, or do you feel?
I feel that if an issue doesn't affect you, why would you care about it? And I'm sick and tired of, you know, yes, the education is definitely there. We've done the work. And if an issue like gender equality or mental health doesn't affect you at the top, why would you then want to take it on board, you know, in terms of politics, to trickle it down to everyday people? And yes, we can live in hope and hope that, you know, our politicians hear us and put things in place. But I'll be honest with you, there are times when it's quite bleak and it does get to a point where, are we ever going to be listened to? Because how much talking can we do?
I think at the end of the day, whether it is mental health or gender equality that we're talking about, or any other topic across the kind of 3 panels that we're doing, we are all human beings at the end of the day. We are all the same people, and it doesn't matter how we identify or who we are or what we do or how we think. We are the same people and we operate in the same ways at the end of the day, and we should be there for each other no matter what. Guys, thank you very much.